today's End Times Prophecy Update, there's several things to bring to your attention, and there's always several things, and it's kind of hard to pick and choose which articles or events to talk about. But this week we saw a lot of talk about the peace plan. We don't know the details of this peace plan. We do know that it will happen at some point. There was a conference or a conversations that were going on in Poland, where there is a meeting there, and that's where Jared Kushner told diplomats that he believes in the peace plan despite the long odds report. So there's going to be a lot of difficulty in pulling this particular plan off, the deal of the century as it's been called. They're not going to unveil it until after April 9th, which is the elections in Israel. So they're going to wait till that happens to see who's going to be in power and what's going on before they start to unveil it, because it makes no difference right now to, hey, let's do it now, and your whole government changes. So we want to make sure that's going to be sorted out by them. But there's a lot of articles that you're going to be reading and hearing about this peace plan, and also how Israel's really hungry and wanting to get the third temple built. So there's going to be a lot more articles and conversations these days about these components. All of them have to take place. There has to be a deal in place. They have to have the third temple. So these are all prophetic end times things that needs to take place. Another interesting article that came out of other websites that talk about Russia hosts Turkey and Iran for talks on Syria peace agreement. So there's this whole development of this ally system within Syria. But Russia tells Turkey, because Turkey's kind of wanting to do its own thing, but they can't create safe zones in Syria without the consent of Assad, despite having brokered a deal in December to create a demilitarized zone in the north part of the region. Russia president is hosting these leaders of Turkey and Iran for talks of Syria peace settlement as expectations mount as the imminent and final defeat of the Islamic State group. So Turkey wanted to create the kind of safe zones, but President of Russia, Putin, wanted to say, well, Assad needs the okay on this. So it's interesting that Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, is telling what's happening there in Syria. So you can see the power play there with Russia. But we see all these countries forming an alliance that will eventually come in and invade Israel, as Ezekiel 38 mentions. But you can see these backdoor deals, their conversations, the development, the relationships, the allies that are developing there. So we're going to continue to see more of that developing. Another interesting article came out of Fortune magazine that talks about the biochip. Is it a good idea? And the article talks about what was taking place in Sweden, but we've mentioned this development quite a few times over the years of these microchips that is going to be placed in people. They already have it in a lot of countries and a lot of businesses, for that matter, to get into their security doors, to get into their buildings, and even some of the places in the airports and to get on trains and planes, they have this microchip. So they're doing away with all this paper stuff and IDs. It's all through this chip that they have in people's hands. It's already there. So we can see the technology's there more today than it was 5 years, 10 years ago. So this is something that's going to continue to develop as we're going to get into a cashless society. As we mentioned, Australia will go cashless in the next, close to 4 years. We already see other countries around the world that have gone cashless. So this is something, but there has to be that one world government in place that will keep control of everything, and a new currency and economy that's going to be developed. But we see this is happening with a lot of businesses that are going this way. There's a chip, instead of having cards or some other forms of ID, it's all done this way. And it's exactly as the mark of the beast is going to mention on the forehand or the forehead. There's going to be this system in place where you can't buy or sell unless you have this. So there has to be this, global control over what's going on. So this is interesting that more of these type of conversations are going on. People are more open for these ideas. So that way, hey, it makes sense to do it. So then they'll go ahead and buy this and get into this program. The other thing that catches your attention, pretty much every day, you're seeing just a rise in godlessness. Just as the Bible tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 3, where it says, know this, that perilous times will come. So the hard to bear, the dangerous, troublesome, and it's the same Greek word terrible that is used in Matthew 8:28 for violent demoniacs. The warfare, the warning that is here deserves our attention. The perilous times will come. Men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brooders, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. And again, people always learning it but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. It's exactly what we're living in today. More today than it was 5-10 years ago. And it's easy to become numb to these things. You're so used to the violence out there, the warfare that's going on, and it's easy to become very complacent and apathetic, and it doesn't bother us anymore, because you're so used to it. And I pray that we would awaken to our senses and be praying for those in these situations, but also one another, that we keep that edge, not to be, come to the ways of the world or godlessness, but it's going to increase. And so we need to keep the full armor of God on. We need to be prepared what's happening. And you see the agendas that is being set by the government and by the schools these days. And then lastly, just as I was thinking of the crusade last night, there's a prophecy that talks about in Matthew 24, and it's really talking more in the tribulation period, but we do see this as a component that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world to all witnesses in all nations, and then the end will come. And we're seeing more access, more opportunities for the gospel to go out than any other time in history. From the internet, YouVersion Bible app, how many hundreds of millions of people have downloaded that. You have from churches to crusades, the one last night, to see a packed house, for people to hear the gospel. And tremendous response. And even his son did a crusade in the Philippines. Cool to see father, son, two different, areas in the world doing crusades. Greg Laurie does these crusades, been doing it since 1989, and Billy Graham since 1947, even though he's passed away last year. But tremendous effort that he's done. And there's many other ministries out there doing these things, and people are more equipped these days. We have more access through Bibles, Wycliffe translations, to internet, radio, television, movies. The word's getting out there. People are being stirred up, and it's that one last kind of push of the gospel before the Lord comes back. We don't have a lot of time, and so you're seeing this real push, especially in these last times, in these last several years. We're seeing more of these opportunities for people to go out and minister and preach the gospel, and we get to be a part of that by our prayers, by getting involved in some capacity. So that was one of those other key things that we're seeing in these last days. The gospel is going to go through all these nations in the world. So it's exciting to see. And that's it for today's update.